And welcome back. As we go ahead and dive into using the scanner class, which is kind of our first class that we're really going to kind of get to use, but this is going to be real essential for us to be able to add another layer to our programming. So the scanner class is, of course, as I already mentioned, a class. Now, this is going to be something that's very essential for us to be able to get user input. Up to this point, pretty much all of our programs we've been typing everything into the code, and then the program spits that back out. But what if we wanted to hand that off to someone else? Well, we need to get user input. We want someone else to enter in values. Now, because this is what's considered a package in Java, and don't have to worry about that terminology just now, just know that we have to import the scanner class. It is not built right into Java. You can't just say, create a scanner object and off it goes. Instead, you have to use this line of code that says import java.util.scanner. The util, of course, is short for utility, which is the package that the scanner class belongs to. This little snippet of code is going to be placed at the very top of our code. So that should always be the first line of code that you see up there is that import statement. Now this class will allow the program to continuously scan for user input and then translate those keystrokes of whatever they've typed as characters for the program to process. So how do we go about actually creating a scanner object? How do we actually get that user input? Well, it's actually not too hard. The following line creates an object of the scanner class. Scanner keyboard equals new scanner system.in. That's all we need. We just need to do that, and we have a scanner object ready to go. Now, keyboard is an object that's created in the scanner class. Remember our old rule, type name equals a value. If we look here, we have a type, which is scanner. We have a name, which is keyboard, and then it equals a value. In this case, it's a new scanner system.in. We'll talk more about this new keyword here and some of this other pieces here when we talk about classes later this year. However, right now, what I want you really to focus in on is just that it kind of follows that same format. You should always have a type, a name equals some value. So as such, because this is just a name here for keyboard, you could theoretically name it any other object name that you want. Now, very often this is called keyboard or sometimes just KB for short. You're welcome to use either. As it makes it very easy to remember of what kind of object we have here and prevents us from confusing that with potential other object names that we may have in a program. Right now, we only have really kind of one that we have, which is the scanner, and we have the string class as well. But having it like keyboard or KB is an easy way for us to keep those straight and don't have to worry about mixing them up with something else. Now, there are multiple methods of the scanner class, and we'll take time eventually to kind of peel through some of those. However, we're going to start just by looking at two today because if we want to actually start getting some user input, we're going to need to introduce a couple methods. Now, the first method is nextInt. The method of the scanner class, in this case, reads in data that the user types to the keyboard. If the user types anything, though, other than an int or an integer, then we're going to get an error, all right, because it's not a valid type. It doesn't match what the program's expecting to see. If you say, hey, I'm going to look for you to get an integer, and then someone types, let's say, 2.5, well, 2.5 is not an integer, and so it's going to crash. Now, numbers, when you type them in, can be separated by white spacing, which either can be a line break or a space. So, for example, I want to put, let's say, 1, and let's say I'm doing like 3 inputs, 1, 2, and 3. Very simple example here. Each one of those numbers has to be separated out by some kind of either white space or some kind of line break in order for the program to know that you're typing the number 1, then the number 2, then the number 3, and not 123. It has no way of differentiating it without some kind of white spacing. Now, any input must be stored back into a variable for the program to actually be able to use. So here I have two variable examples: int number of pods equals keyboard.nextInt, int piece per pod equals keyboard.nextInt. You'll notice in both of these, we have our integer, we have our name equals keyboard.nextInt. This is the line of code right here where if you were to run this in your program, the program would actually stop in the console and just wait until they type something in, and then whatever they type in would then update this variable. Same thing here with piece per pod. Now, once we have those variables filled, we can then output those variables. So that's the nice thing, is that now I can start doing things with these variables here, and rather than simply just trying to predefine them. Now, we also have access to nextDouble. Like nextInt, this method is of the scanner class and is going to read in data that the user types in the keyboard. Now, this one has a little more flexibility because you can read anything that's of type double or technically an integer, because remember doubles, it will automatically handle integers. And that's great. But again, if you type something, let's say like a letter, so let's just say they're looking for a double and you type the letter A, well, we're going to get an input mismatch because those aren't the same types. One is a character type and the other one is, of course, a decimal. Now, just like with next int, numbers have to be separated by white spacing, which can occur either by a line break or a space. And just like before, any input must be stored back into a variable for the program to use. So for example, we have double d1 equals kb.next double. And notice here we're using kb instead of keyboard. Again, it's the same function. It's just preferences to which one you want to use. I'm just showing you that you can use different variable names here for these. Again, I recommend you either use either KB or keyboard. Both of those are acceptable, and they're going to be easier for you to remember. You can use, of course, other ones. I've seen, like, for example, input used, but of course, I find sometimes that can be a little misleading as to what you having doing. Whereas a keyboard is a great one because you know that they're going to be typing from the keyboard, so it's an easy one to remember. Now, just like with nextInt, we want to store those into a variable so that way we can then output that either using a print or print line statement. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at using a little bit of this. So I'm just going to quickly add a quick import statement here at the top. So the very first thing is my java.util.scanner. And now that that's in there, it now exists. And remember, scanner is an object. So it's going to fall here under my comment that says declaration and initialization of variables and objects. So I'm going to go ahead and first create my scanner. I'm just going to make this KB, keep it simple, equals a new scanner. And it's always going to be in the parentheses system.in because you're trying to get input into the program here. So this is pretty much always going to be what you see here on the right hand side. Then let's just create a quick integer here. So let's just say int input num1, and let's do let's just do one int actually, and we'll do a double, and we'll call this input double. And let's then go ahead and do some quick prompts here. So I'm just going to say system.out.println and say please enter integer. And then what I want to do then is say input num equals kb.nextInt. All right, and that should of course allow me to get the integer. Now, if I just leave this as is, I will never know what that is. So a good way to have this come back, and we're going to talk about this later, so just to kind of give that back out here. So I'm just going to system.println, and I'm just going to, in this case, just have it output the variable so I can see that that's a valid thing here. And I can maybe even concatenate this and say like, you typed, and this is called echoing input, and we'll talk more about this later, but let's just go ahead and put that in there. And then we're just going to copy this a little bit here because I want to save myself a little bit of typing here. And I'm going to change this now to my double num, or not double num, it was input double, sorry. Input double, okay. And if I leave this as is, one thing you'll notice is that I'm not getting an error right now with this kb.nextInt. All right, and then remember that's because doubles can handle integers. However, we want to change this to double because if you're expecting a double and someone types in it something that is not a double, it's still a good way to catch this, because if you do nextInt and they type 2.5, we can have some trouble here. So we want to make sure that this is always going to match whatever type we're expecting. All right, and let's just change this to input double. All right, this again, just so we can make sure that that is nice and clear. And let me just, oh, I almost forgot to give the directions here. Please type a double. Let's actually just make that decimal there. And if I run this program, all right, it's asking me to enter an integer, so let's just put 3. And if we want to do a decimal, let's do like 2.7. All right. And the nice thing is now that I have these all together, I can do really cool things. So for example, if I want to add these two numbers, so I'm going to do a system.out.println, and let's just do input num plus input double. All right. So I'm just going to add those. I'm just going to output what those values are going to be. So if I rerun this one more time, I'll use the same numbers, 3 and 2.7. You'll see we get 5.7, and that is not a number. that I had to do any kind of things up in here with. I didn't have to set a value for input num or input double. This is all controlled by whoever is running the program and entering in values. So we now have the ability to create some really much more powerful programs versus when everything was statically assigned.